The Scanketh stood in the dim light of the survey bay and watched the model of Earth float above the table, like a small blue ember that refused to go out no matter how much cold the ship poured into it. And he told himself this was only data and not a living world. But the numbers kept behaving like a heartbeat, and that made him uneasy because he had scanned 100 worlds, and none of them pulsed like this one, and none of them sang back at the scanners with stubborn music the way this one did. And perhaps that was why the old admirals had made a rule that Earth should remain unbothered. But rules were only walls until a stronger will pushed through them, and now the fleet had arrived to test the wall, and he had been ordered to find the cracks. He sent the final query and watched the readouts load across 4 panes at once: the genetic map, the stress models, the cultural reaction curves, and the adaptive risk tree. And he expected to see the common pattern of a soft species that had grown in comfort and would bend until it broke, because that was what the scouts had promised and that was what the council wanted to hear. But the first pane argued with that sweet lie. The human genome showed scars that had healed and scars that had become tools, and it carried the fingerprints of ancient plagues turned into shields, and old hungers turned into thrift, and there were repeats that should have been useless but were wired into responses that woke only when danger pressed. And Keth frowned and ran a second pass with a different algorithm, and the answer did not change. The supposed weakness was a coil waiting to spring on the night side of the small blue ember. The city of Karachi breathed warm air into the dark, and lights drew lines like constellations on the ground. And Dr. Lena Farouk walked out onto the hospital roof between rounds and rubbed tired eyes and looked up at the sky for one quiet minute that belonged to her alone. And she saw a smear that was not a cloud and not a plane and not a normal satellite track, because it bent and held and then slid as if shy. And she felt the small prickle of a thought that said something is here and something is watching. And she laughed at herself, because the hour was late and the day had been long. But she took a picture anyway and sent it to a friend at the university with a short note that said, "Tell me I'm being silly." And she went back downstairs when her pager buzzed because someone needed a hand. And that was the kind of signal her body always obeyed. High above her, the adaptive risk tree finished its run and drew a shape that Keth had seen in only one other place: the old war archives where extinct species had left warnings. And the shape meant do not escalate when pressure increases, because the target transforms and gains strength. And he felt the small cold of fear because he knew the admiral did not like wires that pointed away from war. And he would ask for a simpler story, and Keth could not give it without lying. So he packaged the findings with calm words and put the data in the cleanest order, and paused before sending. And then he added a sentence he had never written in his long service: "This species grows, more capable under stress." The message reached the flagship and moved through rooms with polished floors and officers who preferred sharp edges to soft truths. And it came to Admiral Threx, who had wanted this command for a decade and had promised results measured in fast victories and clean charts. And he read the sentence twice and felt annoyance like grit in his mouth, because numbers were supposed to obey orders and the number here did not. And he called the operations chief and said, "Begin small tests, do not say we are here. Break a little and watch them bend, and when they bend we will break a lot." And he cut the channel and felt better, because action was a language he trusted. Down in the city, Lena handed a cup of water to an old man who had waited too long and told him a simple joke and made him smile. And she felt her own energy lift as if the smile had passed a wire back into her bones. And she walked to the next bed, and the pager buzzed again, and she went where it sent her, and none of it felt grand or heroic. It just felt like the right way for a person to live. And when she paused for air, she glanced at her phone and saw a reply from her friend at the university who had circled the strange smear in her picture and written, "I do not think you are silly at all, and could you come by tomorrow if you have time and bring your exact bearings?" And she saved the message and thought of the sky again, and the prickle returned, but it did not feel like fear. It felt like a beginning. Keth stepped out of the bay and walked the long corridor to the small window where he could look at Earth without the hard filter of the instruments. And as he watched the line of dawn move, he remembered the line from a Forbidden Field report about humans that cadets used to trade in whispers: "Do not poke the coals if you do not want a fire." And he told himself this was myth and romance, and that professional minds did not bow to stories. But he also knew that stories were a kind of map that species used to survive. and the human stories in the database were a forest of maps with trails that always led to one message when something threatened what they loved. They did not fold. They braided themselves together and made a rope and pulled. The first small test came like a hiccup in the power grid. One district blinked and traffic slowed and street corners grew loud, and a tram stopped in place and a clinic went to backup, and Lena felt the lights flicker and then steady. And she heard a generator engage in the basement, and the nurses moved without panic because they had run drills and they had lived through worse. And an orderly started guiding people with a firm voice. And someone propped open a door to let air move, and a child began to cry. And Lena knelt and spoke soft, and the child calmed, and she looked up and saw strangers helping strangers. And she felt that wire again that fed strength back when it was spent. And she thought of the sky and decided she would not wait until tomorrow. She would go to the university after her shift ended, even if her legs protested, because curiosity was also a kind of duty. Reports flowed back to Keth from a dozen cities, and each told the same tale. The small breaks did not make humans weak. They made them attentive and cooperative and even cheerful in ways that did not make sense, if you believed comfort was the only soil for good acts. And he wrote a new line in his log: pressure recruits them, and he wondered if the admiral would understand that this was a form of armament, not a soft trait to exploit. And he felt something like pride that a species could carry such a thing inside its code and its customs. Both at once. When Lena finally stepped out of the hospital, the sky had turned the pale gray that came before dawn, and the streets were still busy with repair crews and tea sellers, and women walking home in pairs for safety and company. And she breathed the air and felt the city like a living friend. And she raised her eyes because habit asked her to, and saw the smear again, but closer now. And it was not a smear at all. It was a cluster of lights arranged like a patient watcher. And she did not flinch. She lifted her phone and took another picture, and then she looked at the empty seat of a parked motorcycle and made a small plan in her head and began to walk toward the university with steady steps, because she wanted to know, and wanting to know was the first move in every good human story. On the ship, Keth sent one more packet to the flagship and added a quiet warning. Cease tests, or their response will teach us a lesson we cannot afford. And when he pressed send, he knew the admiral would ignore him. And he also knew what the next hours would bring. Not collapse, but ignition, and he looked again at the small blue ember, and understood that it was not an ember at all. It was tinder, stacked in careful piles by history, and by love and by loss, and all it needed was a spark, and somewhere below a doctor walked into the first light of morning, and the spark was already falling. The test Keth watched the first wave of field tests roll out below from his observation window and felt a knot of tension he had not expected, because the humans did not behave like the simulations had predicted, and the models that promised bending and yielding instead returned signs of cohesion and clever improvisation, and the more pressure the invaders applied, the more the humans adapted and solved problems that should have broken them. And the first small test had been a power glitch in a district. The next was a controlled disruption of a water supply in a suburb, and every time the alert went off on Keth's console, the humans responded not with panic but with procedure and initiative, and he began to take notes not as an officer but as a scholar of a species that defied the expectations the fleet had laid before him. Lena Farouk moved through the hospital corridors with efficiency she did not need to think about, because the drills she had run for years had etched the motions into her memory. And when the water supply in the northern district failed, the hospital activated backup tanks and portable filtration, and she supervised without raising her voice, because raising it would not increase compliance, but calm focus would. And she looked at her team and nodded when they adjusted a pump or carried a patient. And outside the hospital, the neighborhood formed an ad hoc chain of cooperation, people passing water jugs and checking on elders and children. And when a local store owner opened crates of bottled water, someone organized distribution with a scrap of paper and a pen, and the system ran itself, because humans had practiced survival as an art, without thinking of it as heroism. The alien analysts in orbit recorded patterns in human behavior that made their simulations rewrite themselves in real time, and Keth tapped a finger on the console because the correlations were impossible in theory and undeniable in data, and he knew that his superiors would demand explanations that were simple and categorical. but explanations that were simple and categorical did not exist here. And he began to write a long note to himself that might never leave his console because it said the humans were unpredictable in the way that intelligence and stubbornness and memory combine, and that the more you tried to push them down, the higher they built a bridge over the pressure. In the suburb called Gulshan, a small team of humans gathered around a blocked street and a fallen tree that had stopped the usual traffic, and the soldier who had been assigned to patrol the area did not bark orders. He looked at the crowd and said, "We need a plan," and someone suggested ropes, someone suggested axes, someone suggested moving cars first, and the soldier nodded and gave each a small roll. And when the team began to act, the soldier realized he was not leading them. In a normal sense, they were leading themselves, and he simply became the point where all effort converged. And when the first rope snapped, he smiled because the group immediately tried another way, and the tree moved, not because the soldier had forced it, but because they had learned to move together under pressure. Lena had left the hospital briefly and walked toward a university lab where the strange lights had been tracked, and when she arrived, the building was empty, except for a coder who had stayed behind to track the anomalous streak in the sky, and he greeted her with a nervous laugh and said, "I thought you were seeing things," and she smiled and showed him her phone and the picture, and he said, "This is not normal," and she said, "I know," and he said, "I think they are testing us," and she said, "We need to understand them, not fight yet, because what you call testing may be learning." And they looked at the sky together and both felt a chill that was neither fear nor excitement, but recognition that something bigger than them had arrived. Keth observed the humans improvising in streets, hospitals, and labs, and recorded the instances of cooperation where models predicted confusion. He wrote down soldier plus civilian, plus elder, plus child equals emergent strategy, and he frowned at the simplicity of the equation. Because the explanation could not be reduced to variables, it required understanding memory and instinct and social bonds, and he realized that the scans that said weakness were incomplete because they looked at the code and ignored the habits and culture and training that lived outside the double helix. And he could not send this report without being accused of speculation. But he wrote it anyway and saved it to a hidden folder, and a small fire of pride warmed him because he understood what the fleet refused to see. Outside the university, the sun rose slowly and painted the streets orange and gold, and the citizens moved through the chaos of partial water outages and traffic delays and disrupted power with a rhythm that made the observers in orbit uncomfortable, because it was not fear, it was not surrender, it was calculation and empathy intertwined, and everywhere the humans made small choices that multiplied into resilience, and every choice taught another human what could be done when rules failed, and the soldier who had cleared the fallen tree met the doctor who had managed the backup water systems, and they exchanged nods of understanding without introducing themselves, and the coder arrived with data that made a small map, and they realized that 3 strangers could influence 100 people with calm coordination, and they smiled, not because they were heroes, but because they had realized the first rule humans learned: young never panic when survival matters. Keth noticed the pattern forming across neighborhoods and districts, the same behaviors repeated in city after city, and the more the fleet pushed with minor disruptions, the more humans adapted and learned, and cooperated and shared resources, and the more he realized that the humans were operating like a network, with invisible wires connecting each act of care and strategy to another, and the small tests designed to prove weakness were teaching humans to be stronger. And he wrote another hidden note this time. A single-line pressure teaches adaptation and resilience stronger than any alloy, stronger than any weapon. The Admiral will not understand this yet. And he leaned back and watched the city, and saw a moment that almost made him smile. A child ran to give an elder a blanket, and another child ran to guide a stranger around the flooded street, and a dog barked in agreement. Lena, the soldier, and the coder walked together toward the university entrance and shared stories of the morning, and realized that they had become a team without realizing it, and that their combined knowledge of health, logistics, and tracking the strange lights made them a small nucleus of strategy, and the sky overhead pulsed faintly as if watching and learning, and they felt a kind of pride that did not belong to one person or another, but to the species itself. And when Lena suggested, "We need to understand them better," The soldier said yes because understanding is the only way to survive, and the coder said maybe it is the only way to teach them not to underestimate us. Keth sent another encrypted note to himself, and another warning. To the small fleet units testing human reactions, do not push too hard, or you will learn lessons you cannot pay for. And he realized that the admiral would ignore it because arrogance and expectation had teeth sharper than caution. And he wondered how many of these small tests the humans would survive before the fleet recognized that the scan had been right. In a way no one wanted to admit. And somewhere in the streets of the city, humans carried on their mourning without ceremony, without fuss, without acknowledgement of the lesson they were teaching aliens, and he realized the lesson was far from over. The first strike. The alien ships glided above the city in formations that should have terrified any species less stubborn than humans, and the weapons glimmered with energy that could vaporize entire blocks in moments, and the sensors picked up the pulse of fear in the population. But it did not spread like the fleet expected, because humans acted not on instinct alone, but on trained. Calm, and the military units that had remained in quiet readiness moved like shadows into strategic positions, while civilians became natural extensions of the plan, passing supplies, guiding the injured, and improvising barricades that diverted the alien pulses into empty streets. And Keth watched the data flood his console, and he felt a strange mixture of frustration and fascination, because the humans did not follow the program of panic and surrender. Lena returned to the hospital as the first beam struck near the outskirts, and she coordinated triage stations not by yelling orders, but by delegating authority to nurses and volunteers. And when the alarms rang, she did not flinch. She moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed disaster for years, and in the streets nearby, children who had been evacuated helped set up temporary shelters, while adults formed chains to move debris, and each action was measured efficient and adaptive. And when a ship fired again, a team of civilians led by a retired engineer redirected water from a broken hydrant to create steam screens that temporarily blocked the sensors of the alien surveillance drones, and Keth tapped his console furiously, trying to adjust his models because the humans were reacting faster than any simulation could predict, and the more he watched, the more he realized that the scan that had labeled them weak had only considered the physical genome, but had ignored the most dangerous part of humanity, which was experience and learning and coordination. In a suburb, a small squad of soldiers armed with standard rifles and drones that should have been useless against the alien armor moved along a street that had been partially flattened, and they used shadows and broken vehicles to shield themselves while civilians helped mark escape routes. And when one of the alien drones fired a pulse that disintegrated a parked car, the humans did not scream. They adjusted their formation and found a way to confuse the sensors by coordinating movement in patterns that mimicked the environment. And when a child dropped a flare into a puddle, the reflection caused the drone to miscalculate a trajectory and crash into a wall, and the soldiers looked at each other in disbelief, because these were not random acts of luck. They were rapid calculations shared across human networks, and each human instinct and training became a weapon that the aliens had not scanned or considered. Keth recorded every second and began sending fragmented reports back to the fleet, with warnings that were met with skepticism, because the command structure refused to believe that humans could improvise at scale, and he felt the weight of truth against protocol, and yet he could not stop himself from noting patterns and recording sequences and predicting outcomes that his models could not yet confirm. And when a second wave of alien beams targeted a district where humans had formed a temporary command center, the civilians moved wounded personnel and set up decoys, and the soldiers coordinated communications, and for hours the aliens tried to strike decisively and failed repeatedly because the humans learned faster than they fired, and each failure became data for adaptation at the university. Lena, the soldier, and the coder watched the sky while directing civilians to safe zones, and each instruction they gave was amplified across neighborhoods because humans did not need centralized command to operate as a unit. They only needed trust and information, and the strange lights in the sky flickered as if observing and analyzing, and the coder realized that the humans were not just surviving. They were teaching the aliens that the assumptions made by the scan were dangerously incomplete, and when a building collapsed nearby, humans formed chains to pull the trapped out, and when the alien pulse returned, a small group of engineers redirected energy from broken lines to disable temporary drones, and the aliens realized that energy they believed would dominate was being used against them in ways they had never conceived. Keth leaned forward and typed rapidly, his thoughts unfiltered because the fleet needed to know that the human genome alone was not the measure of potential, but that every weakness predicted had been transformed into a weapon by training experience and collaboration. And he realized that he had begun to admire the species he was meant to evaluate and destroy. And when another pulse struck the outskirts of the city, he felt a thrill, because the humans adapted immediately and the soldiers and civilians combined in improvisational formations that resembled algorithms of survival, and the aliens, who had scanned them for weakness, were learning too late that humans taught each other resilience in moments of crisis, and each act of adaptation spread like wildfire across the population. Lena moved through the chaos like a conductor guiding an orchestra of improvised survival, and the soldier beside her organized defensive perimeters while the coder relayed information, and the city became a living machine of response and recovery. And when the first alien ship hovered low above a school, the children and teachers had already evacuated using routes planned by volunteers, who had learned to read the signals, and the aliens fired and the humans were already moving shadows into the path, and the beam struck empty streets while Keth's console filled with data, showing humans converting every attack into a lesson, and the aliens who had come to test weakness were discovering that humans converted weakness into weapons of creativity and coordination, and each pulse returned diminished results. By midday, the first strike had failed to achieve decisive victory, and the humans had adapted their routines and networks and improvised defenses, and when Keth looked at the unfolding patterns, he realized that no scan could ever measure the most dangerous part of humanity, which was not muscle or bone or reflex, but experience and memory and instinct and social cohesion. And each district of the city had become a living laboratory of improvisation, and the aliens who had expected surrender or confusion were encountering calculation and unity. And he began to understand that this first test had already failed, and the humans were not only surviving, they were learning faster than the fleet could anticipate. And he noted down in his personal file that the humans had transformed predicted weakness into a series of escalating countermeasures that would eventually overwhelm the assumptions of the fleet. Lena, the soldier, and the coder paused for a moment in a cleared courtyard and looked at each other, and realized that they were not alone in understanding what was happening, because every human around them was thinking in parallel, forming networks of strategy, and every response was teaching the aliens that survival depended on improvisation and coordination. And Keth, watching from orbit, began to record the single most important observation of the day, and he typed slowly because words felt inadequate. Humans were weapons of experience. Humans were weapons of learning. Humans were weapons of adaptation. And the first strike had only proven the beginning of a lesson. The aliens were not ready to receive, and the sun set over the city, casting long shadows, and the humans continued to move and build and teach and fight and survive. The adaptive counter. The fleet had recognized the initial failure of their first strike, and now dispatched specialized units designed to bypass human improvisation, and Keth observed the new formations with a sense of both dread and curiosity, because these units were faster, smarter, and equipped with adaptive algorithms meant to predict human behavior, and yet the humans responded as if they had been expecting it. The soldier moved through the streets directing civilians to alternate shelters, while Lena coordinated the distribution of supplies, and the coder monitored the energy signatures and suggested ways to interfere with sensor tracking, and everywhere the humans acted in ways that were not just reaction, but anticipation. And the aliens realized that predicting human action was no longer a matter of scanning DNA. It was a matter of observing a species that learned collectively in real time. A specialized alien unit landed in a central park and immediately deployed reconnaissance drones designed to map human movement patterns, and the humans, untrained in alien technology, discovered that reflection and smoke from broken generators created blind zones in the sensors, and children placed mirrors to deflect laser scans while adults created decoy formations that mimicked gatherings of civilians, and the soldier and Lena directed these actions as if following instinct and experience combined. And Keth typed furiously, because the humans had converted observation into countermeasure faster than any simulation could register, and the units that were supposed to dominate the humans found themselves delayed by improvisation and adaptation that should not have existed in a neighborhood partially destroyed by the earlier strikes. Engineers turned debris into defensive barricades, and the local community organized a network of signals using sounds and lights to relay information about alien positions, and when a drone approached a small team of humans, raised a series of reflective panels, and the beam was scattered harmlessly, while another group redirected water from broken pipes to create vapor curtains, and the aliens who had assumed weakness saw confusion, replaced by structured response. And Keth realized that humans treated danger as a puzzle to solve collectively, and each attempt of the fleet to enforce compliance taught the humans new strategies that the aliens had never anticipated. Lena entered a school-turned-makeshift command center and met with teachers and volunteers who had mapped the city in layers of streets, alleys, and open spaces, and they shared information about where the specialized units had deployed, and she nodded and assigned small teams to distract drones while others evacuated civilians, and every action was amplified because humans shared information instantly without centralized command. And the soldier moved through streets coordinating perimeter safety, and when a pulse arrived that should have destroyed the command center, they had already evacuated and replaced their positions with decoy signals, and the alien units reacted as if the humans were 2 steps ahead. And Keth began to feel an unfamiliar emotion that was not fear, but respect. In the industrial district, the coder discovered that disrupted energy lines could be used to create electrical interference, and he guided technicians to adjust circuits to overload the alien sensors temporarily. And when the specialized units moved into the zone, they encountered unexpected resistance, not from brute force, but from ingenuity and improvisation, and when one of the units tried to fire, the beam was diverted by a makeshift mirror array, and the humans laughed quietly, not in arrogance but in recognition that their improvisation had worked. And the soldiers realized that the humans did not need permission to act because the lesson of survival had been encoded in their culture, and every failure by the aliens became an opportunity for humans to learn and adapt. Keth observed patterns forming across districts and realized that the humans were converting every threat into a learning opportunity, and the simulations he ran could not keep up, because every human decision altered probabilities in ways that no model could predict. And the aliens, trained to read weakness in DNA, discovered that the real power of humanity lay outside the genome in memory, experience, culture, and collective coordination. And he began to write detailed notes not for command but for himself, because no one else would believe that a species could adapt faster than the scanning algorithms could measure. And every hour the humans became more resilient, more cohesive, and more dangerous to the assumptions of the fleet. At the university, the 3 humans paused for a moment and realized that the city was operating as a single organism with decentralized nodes of strategy, and each citizen contributed to the overall pattern of survival and adaptation. And when a specialized alien strike team attempted to isolate a sector, they discovered that streets had been rerouted and signals misdirected, and civilians created intentional bottlenecks that guided the invaders into empty zones. And the soldier nodded at Lena and the coder, realizing that this was not just survival. This was education in real-time, teaching the aliens that humans were not merely reacting. They were anticipating and countering, and every act of learning strengthened the entire population. And Keth realized that the scans that labeled humans as weak had been catastrophically wrong. In the downtown area, a small squad of humans repurposed construction machinery to create movable shields, and the civilians coordinated with them to lead alien units into decoy zones, and every pulse that the aliens fired was met with unpredictable and effective countermeasures. And Keth watched with increasing astonishment as the humans turned predicted vulnerability into weapons of improvisation and coordination. And when the final unit of the first wave tried to take control of a communications hub, they discovered that humans had established multiple backups and relay stations, and every signal they tried to jam was rerouted, and every attempt to disrupt their networks created new opportunities for learning and adaptation. By nightfall, the fleet realized that the specialized units had failed to achieve decisive results, and Keth typed a report that began with the words, "Humans are not weak. They are weapons of experience and learning," and every failure in the field strengthened their cohesion and strategy. And he knew that this report would be ignored because it contradicted assumptions, but he saved it anyway. and the humans continued to move in the dark, illuminated by fires, streetlights, and the flashes of alien pulses, and every movement was calculated and coordinated, and the city had become a machine of improvisation and adaptation that the aliens could not dominate, and every citizen was a node in the network of resistance, and every strike the aliens launched taught the humans new strategies that would be used tomorrow. Lena, the soldier and the coder, stood on a rooftop looking at the city and realized that the humans had survived the first adaptive strike and converted it into a system of learning and resistance, and the sun would rise again and the humans would continue to improvise to adapt to every challenge, and Keth knew that the fleet would continue to underestimate humanity, and that every calculation based on DNA alone was meaningless, because the humans had proven that true power lived in the lessons learned in the streets, the hospitals, and the homes, and every citizen had become a weapon of adaptation, and the aliens would never be ready for what humanity could become. The turning tide. The fleet regrouped after the failure of their first adaptive units, and this time, they sent command ships with elite strike teams designed to overwhelm human coordination, and Keth watched from orbit as the humans moved, not with panic but with purpose, and the streets were alive with signals of improvisation, and the soldier led squads that had learned to read energy pulses and predict alien movements, and Lena coordinated evacuation points and resource distribution, and the coder monitored interference patterns and suggested ways to create temporary blind zones for alien sensors, and every human acted not as individuals, but as parts of a larger organism that could adapt instantly to threats, and every pulse of alien fire became data that strengthened the response. In the industrial sector, engineers used rubble to build moving barricades, and civilians used fire and smoke to create cover. And when a strike team landed, the humans did not scatter. They moved in formations that funneled the aliens into zones of disadvantage. And when one squad fired a pulse to destroy human fortifications, they discovered that humans had redirected energy from broken lines to create shields that absorbed the impact, and the soldier and Lena coordinated the placement of civilians to act as decoys. And when one of the strike teams tried to advance, it encountered a series of traps, not lethal but confusing, that slowed the units and forced recalculation. And Keth realized that humans were weaponizing the chaos of battle in ways that no algorithm could predict. In the residential district's children and adults alike participated in improvisational defenses. And when a small alien unit entered a courtyard, they found shadows moved by ropes and mirrors that created illusions of greater numbers, and signals of evacuation were disguised as tactical commands, and civilians moved in patterns that suggested retreat, but were in fact encirclements. And when a specialized drone tried to target them, it was misled by reflections and vapor, and the humans moved forward in perfect timing. And Keth typed notes in disbelief, because the humans were learning from every pulse of attack and every movement of the aliens, and transforming weakness into opportunity, and the fleet continued to underestimate the capacity of adaptation encoded in culture and experience. Rather than Deanna, Lena moved through a collapsed building that had been converted into a temporary command center, and instructed volunteers to place obstacles and guide small squads of soldiers to alternate streets, and each action was amplified by communication lines improvised from radios and signal mirrors, and civilians acted as living nodes in a network of survival. And when a squad of elite aliens attempted to flank the command center, they were funneled into narrow streets where humans had placed hidden barriers and redirected energy from broken vehicles to create confusion and disruption, and every attack by the fleet generated lessons that were immediately shared across neighborhoods. And Keth recorded the data with increasing respect, because the humans were not merely reacting, they were anticipating and innovating. In the downtown district, the soldier led teams that repurposed construction cranes and rubble to create elevated positions and barriers, and civilians coordinated signals using lights and reflections to mislead sensors. And when an alien unit fired, it struck a series of decoys and misdirected targets, while the humans moved to strategic positions to monitor weaknesses, and every pulse of attack became a lesson, and every failure of the aliens was recorded in real time by humans and shared instantly across the city. And Keth realized that humans were creating an environment where adaptation was not temporary but cumulative, and each response built on previous responses, creating layers of resilience that no scan could predict. In the university sector, the coder discovered that broken energy lines could be repurposed to overload alien circuits, temporarily, and he guided small teams of technicians to reroute power in ways that created confusion and vulnerability in the specialized units. And when the elite strike teams attempted to move, they encountered electromagnetic interference and visual illusions, and the humans were already positioned to exploit every hesitation and delay. And Keth typed notes about the humans as if writing a manual for an alien species that could never fully comprehend the complexity of human improvisation and learning, and he realized that the scans that predicted weakness had ignored the most dangerous trait, which was the ability to turn knowledge into action instantly and collectively. Lena and the soldier moved through alleys guiding civilians, while the coder manipulated energy fields, and every district became a web of improvisation and anticipation. And the fleet attempted to coordinate attacks, but each wave was met with unexpected resistance and human countermeasures that were adaptive and fluid, and every unit sent to engage was delayed by the improvisation of humans. And when the aliens tried to anticipate movement, they discovered patterns too complex to calculate in real time, and Keth marveled because humans had converted the chaos of battle into an environment where they learned faster than the fleet could act, and every pulse of energy, every maneuver, every failed strike became a tool of survival and escalation. By the end of the first day of the elite strike teams, the humans had not only survived but expanded zones of control using improvisation and coordinated adaptation, and the city was a living organism of learning and response. And when Keth reported to command, he noted that humans had weaponized every predicted vulnerability into a method of collective advantage, and the fleet could no longer assume control based on technology alone, because humans turned every threat into an advantage, and every act of aggression taught them new strategies. And the soldier and Lena observed the movement of the aliens and smiled quietly because they understood that the aliens were learning too late that humans were not merely DNA but experienced memory, culture, and coordination in motion, and every citizen had become a node in a living network of adaptation and resistance. As night fell over the city, the humans continued to move quietly through streets and alleys, guiding civilians and positioning improvised defenses, and the aliens paused to regroup, because every assumption they had about human weakness had been proven catastrophically wrong. And Keth recorded the final note for the day. Humans are not weak, humans are adaptive. Humans convert danger into weapons and experience into strategy, and no scan can predict the depth of their learning, and the fleet would soon discover that the more they attacked, the stronger the humans became. And every pulse of alien energy sent to dominate the city only served to strengthen the human network and teach the fleet a lesson they were not ready to understand. And in the shadows, the soldier, Lena, and the coder prepared for the next wave, knowing that every failure of the aliens was their victory, and every citizen a teacher in the art of survival. Humanity strikes back. By the next day, the city had transformed into a web of improvisation and strategy. Every street, every alley, every rooftop was a node in a network designed to learn and adapt. And the soldier moved with purpose, directing squads to positions that maximized cover and visibility, while Lena coordinated resource distribution and medical teams, and the coder monitored alien energy signatures and suggested ways to create interference. And the civilians acted not with fear, but with understanding, each movement, calculated each action, contributing to the larger picture. And when the fleet attempted another strike, they discovered that humans had already predicted the likely paths and prepared responses that would turn every attack into a lesson for tomorrow. In the industrial district, humans repurposed cranes, rubble, and damaged vehicles to create moving barricades and channels that guided alien units into zones designed for confusion. And when drones flew overhead, children raised reflective panels, and adults triggered smoke generators, and the beams that should have destroyed them were scattered harmlessly. And the soldiers observed in amazement, because every strike the aliens attempted became data that strengthened human coordination. And Keth realized that these humans were not just surviving. They were weaponizing the very nature of adaptation to dominate the battlefield, without even using lethal force. And every miscalculation by the aliens only amplified the effectiveness of the countermeasures. In the residential areas, the communities moved in patterns that suggested chaos, but were in fact carefully choreographed sequences designed to mislead and confuse the aliens. And when a specialized strike team landed, they encountered empty streets and false signals, and the humans appeared in unexpected positions, creating ambushes not to kill, but to delay and redirect. and every encounter became a training session for both civilians and combatants. And Keth typed furiously as the patterns emerged. Humans were converting vulnerability into offensive strategy, and every resident became a teacher in improvisation, and every failed strike by the aliens reinforced the human network and increased the efficiency of communication. And response Lena moved through the university district instructing teams to use broken energy lines to create interference fields, and sensors that had once tracked humans easily were now misled by reflections, vapor, and electromagnetic fluctuations. And when the elite strike teams attempted to advance, they were forced into blind zones and diversion paths, and the humans moved behind them, adjusting the patterns and rerouting civilians. And the soldier observed from rooftops and signaled with lights and reflections, creating sequences that the aliens could not calculate. And the coder manipulated energy flows to generate temporary blackouts in alien circuits, and every human became part of a living machine of adaptation and resistance. In the Central Park, humans had created traps using overturned vehicles, ropes, and improvised nets, and when an alien unit attempted to land, they were funneled into zones where energy from broken lines and mirrors created disorientation and hesitation. And every attempt to use brute force was countered by ingenuity and anticipation. And Keth realized that DNA scans meant nothing because humans had learned to convert instinct observation and collective memory into real-time strategy, and every misstep by the aliens became an opportunity for the humans to exploit weaknesses, not in body but in planning and prediction. And the city itself had become a weapon of improvisation and adaptation. The soldiers and civilians moved as one unit. Every alley, every rooftop, every broken street was a piece of a puzzle designed to confuse, mislead, and teach. And the fleet realized that their technology alone could not dominate a species that had weaponized learning and observation. And Keth observed patterns emerging that could not be simulated. Humans were predicting moves and adapting faster than algorithms could register. And every strike against them only strengthened coordination and expanded control. And the soldier and Lena orchestrated movements that looked chaotic to outsiders but were precise and deadly in efficiency. And every civilian participated willingly, and with understanding that their actions contributed to the whole. In the industrial sector, humans repurposed old machinery to create elevated platforms, and when drones fired, they reflected beams harmlessly away. And when ground units advanced, they were met with barriers that delayed and redirected them, and civilians signaled each other with light sounds and improvised codes, and the fleet attempted to adjust, but found that every action was anticipated and every countermeasure had been learned from previous encounters. And Keth realized that humans were not just resilient. They were offensive in their improvisation, turning every threat into advantage and every weakness into a tool. And the aliens began to doubt that brute force alone could ever dominate this species. In the downtown district, humans used every building, every alley, every piece of debris to create a complex environment of adaptation and anticipation. And when the strike teams attempted to isolate sectors, they found themselves led into false zones and misdirected paths. And every failure by the aliens became a reinforcement of human strategy. And Keth typed the observation repeatedly. Humans convert experience into strategy. They weaponize adaptation, and they teach themselves collectively in real time. And the soldier and Lena moved among the citizens, guiding positions and directing improvised defenses, and the coder generated temporary energy fields that disrupted alien sensors, and every citizen became part of a network that was learning faster than the fleet could act. By nightfall, the humans had not only survived the new wave of elite strike teams, but had converted every attack into data for the next day. And every street had become a trap, every building a shield, and every citizen a node in the system of adaptation. And when the fleet attempted to regroup and plan the next strike, they realized that their assumptions were catastrophically wrong. And Keth documented the truth. Humans are not weak. Humans are not predictable. Humans learn and adapt faster than any machine. And every strike against them becomes a lesson and a weapon for the future. And as the city slept, the soldier, Lena, and the coder walked through streets knowing that the humans had become unstoppable not through brute force, but through the relentless power of learning, adaptation, and cooperation. And the aliens would soon understand that humanity had turned weakness into strength and survival into dominance. Humanity unleashed. The morning sun rose over the city, and humanity was no longer merely defending. They were advancing with the confidence of a species that had learned every weakness and turned every threat into a weapon, and the streets that had been battlegrounds yesterday were now paths of strategy. And the soldier led squads forward, coordinating with civilians who moved with purpose and precision, and Lena directed the placement of improvised energy barriers and medics and engineers, and the coder monitored alien energy signatures, predicting likely movements, and every citizen acted as part of a living network, and the aliens realized for the first time that they were facing a species that not only survived but adapted instantly. In the industrial sector, cranes were moved to create elevated positions, and rubble was repurposed to create paths that forced alien units into zones where humans controlled every angle. And every strike fired by drones or ground units was deflected by energy barriers, mirrors, or improvised shields. And when a specialized strike team attempted to advance, they encountered a maze of misdirection traps and illusions, and every hesitation was exploited by humans who had anticipated every possible outcome. And Keth observed in disbelief because the humans had transformed the battlefield into a living organism that learned faster than any alien algorithm, and every encounter became a rehearsal for the next one. In the downtown districts, the soldier directed movements of humans through streets where every building and alley had been converted into a tool of war, not to kill indiscriminately, but to teach control and precision. And the civilians signaled each other with light sounds and subtle movements, creating sequences that guided the flow of battle. And when elite alien units landed, they found themselves disoriented and misdirected, and their formations broken, and every misstep became an advantage for humanity. And Keth realized that no DNA scan, no prediction could have revealed this level of improvisation and collective intelligence. And he typed notes furiously. Humans are not predictable. Humans convert danger into opportunity and weakness into strategy. Lena moved through alleys, coordinating with civilians to create false paths and decoys, and when an alien unit attempted to flank the command center, they were funneled into traps designed from rubble, broken machinery, and temporary energy fields, and every advance by the aliens was countered with precision by humans who had learned from previous failures, and each citizen acted not out of fear, but with understanding and purpose. And the soldier led small squads that intercepted units while civilians created diversions and improvised defenses, and the coder manipulated energy lines to overload sensors temporarily, and every action reinforced the collective intelligence of humanity, and turned the battlefield into a classroom where aliens learned too late that every prediction they had made was wrong. In the residential zones, children and adults moved with coordination, guiding alien units into streets lined with obstacles, and signals, and the humans turned every pulse of attack into data for the next move. And when a strike team attempted to use brute force, they were met with confusion and improvisation, and every hesitation amplified human advantage. And Keth watched in astonishment because humanity had weaponized experience, memory, and culture, and converted them into a strategy more powerful than any weapon the fleet had deployed, and every citizen became both shield and teacher, and every miscalculation by the aliens strengthened the human network. By midday, humans had begun counterattacks, pushing alien units back from key districts, and when a command ship attempted to land, it encountered cities transformed into complex zones of interference and reflection and misdirection, and humans guided drones into traps created from broken energy lines and improvised mirrors and smoke generators, and the soldier, Lena, and coder coordinated every move so that every alien advance became predictable not to them, but to humans who had learned to see patterns where no technology could detect. And Keth recorded every moment humans convert every failure of the enemy into advantage, and no attack strengthens them less than the last. It amplifies them in the industrial sectors, elevated barricades, and controlled debris, redirected alien forces, while civilians used signals to mislead and delay, and every unit that attempted to breach human lines was funneled into zones of confusion and hesitation, and humans used speed, improvisation, and anticipation to dominate, and every movement reinforced previous lessons, and every encounter became a tool for further strategy. And Keth realized finally that the scans for weakness had failed completely, because humans did not rely solely on strength or speed. They relied on experience, adaptation, and the relentless drive to survive and turn survival into mastery. By late afternoon, the alien fleet began retreating because every attempt to engage resulted in misdirection failure and disarray. And when the elite strike teams regrouped, they were met with calculated resistance and improvisation at every level, and humans pushed forward, reclaiming every district that had been threatened and converting each into a hub of further coordination. And the soldier moved among the ranks, guiding squads and inspiring civilians who had become warriors in strategy and observation. And Lena directed the rebuilding of barriers and medical support, and Coder manipulated signals and energy fields to ensure the aliens could not regain control. And Keth typed the final note: humans are not weak. Humans are not predictable. Humans convert danger into advantage. They learn faster than any machine. They adapt collectively, and every failure of the enemy becomes a weapon for survival and domination. As night fell over the city, the streets were quiet but alive with anticipation. Humans had survived every wave, and every attack had strengthened their coordination and adaptability. And the fleet had begun retreating slowly, understanding for the first time that brute force alone could not dominate this species. And in the shadows, the soldier, Lena, and Coder walked among the citizens who had fought and learned and improvised together. And every face reflected understanding, pride, and a quiet satisfaction that humanity had turned weakness into strength and survival into a weapon. And Keth watched in disbelief, finally admitting that no prediction, no scan, no force could have fully comprehended the depth of human ingenuity. And every citizen had become part of a system stronger than any technology. And the fleet had learned too, late, that humans were not just survivors, they were unstoppable. The city was still and the stars shone above, and humanity had risen victorious not because of weapons alone, but because of cooperation, learning, adaptation, and relentless determination. And the soldier looked at Lena and Coder and nodded, and every citizen felt the quiet pride of a species that had proven that survival was just the beginning, and that every attack could be converted into strength, and the aliens would remember this day forever. And Keth typed the final words: humanity had been scanned for weakness, but the scanners found weapons, and the weapons were every human alive, every human thinking, moving, learning, adapting, together. And for the first time, the universe understood that humans were not to be underestimated. Humanity Unleashed, the final chapter. The city breathed like a living organism, alive with energy, with movement, with a rhythm that no alien could predict. And humans moved through it like currents in a river, shifting, flowing, adapting, and every street, every alley, every building had become a weapon and a shield. And the soldier led squads not with orders but with guidance, teaching improvisation and instinct, and every civilian was a node in a network, learning, communicating, acting together. And Lena coordinated medical teams, engineers, and scouts, creating layers of defense that were invisible yet impenetrable, and the Coder manipulated signals and energy flows to create illusions and interference that confounded even the most advanced alien sensors. And the aliens felt the first real fear they had ever known, because humanity had become unpredictable, unstoppable, and unstoppable. The fleet attempted to reorganize. Elite strike teams landed, thinking they could intimidate or dominate, and immediately found themselves funneled into zones that were traps and decoys. Every move anticipated, every reaction accounted for, every hesitation exploited. And humans moved like shadows, like wind, like a force. No machine could calculate every civilian, a teacher, every soldier, a conductor, and every unit learned in real time from every engagement. And Keth watched from the observation deck, unable to comprehend the depth of improvisation and resilience, because humans converted weakness into strategy, and every attempt to harm them strengthened the very thing the aliens hoped to destroy. In the industrial sector, humans turned rubble, cranes, and broken vehicles into elevated paths and funnels that guided alien units into disorientation zones. And when energy weapons fired, they reflected harmlessly back into empty streets or dissipated into smoke and mirrors. And humans advanced behind each failed strike, learning, teaching, signaling, and improvising, and every child, adult, and soldier contributed. And Keth realized finally that brute force alone could never overcome a species that converted every danger into advantage, every mistake into a lesson, and every citizen into a weapon of adaptation and anticipation. And the aliens began to retreat step by step, because they could not calculate instinct, intuition, learning, and cooperation. combined in the residential and commercial sectors. Humans used abandoned vehicles, overturned barricades, and improvised energy fields to create a labyrinth that no alien could navigate without hesitation, and every attempt to break the line only strengthened human coordination. And when elite teams tried to flank the command center, they were rerouted into dead-end zones of confusion and distraction, and humans moved silently, efficiently, communicating through signs, sounds, reflections, and improvised codes. And Keth typed furiously, "Humans do not fight like machines. They fight like thought, like instinct, like adaptation, like life," and every misstep the aliens made became data that expanded human dominance. And the fleet realized slowly that this species could not be defeated. Afternoon humans began counterattacking, pushing aliens back from every critical sector, and converting previous failures into new strategies. And every maneuver became more refined, more precise, more unpredictable, and civilians guided drones into traps, and soldiers intercepted units, and Lena coordinated barriers, and medics and engineers to create controlled chaos that protected humans, while exhausting aliens and the coder manipulated energy lines to blind sensors, create interference, and mislead calculations, and every action reinforced human learning, and every encounter turned the battlefield into a living classroom, teaching both humans and aliens that control could not be taken. It had to be earned, and humanity had already mastered it. As night fell over the city, the aliens began retreating in confusion and fear, and humans advanced steadily, reclaiming districts, turning the terrain into zones of improvisation and advantage. And the soldier moved among them, guiding squads, inspiring civilians who had become warriors in observation and adaptation, and every citizen felt the power of survival transformed into dominance. And Keth watched helplessly, typing the final words, "Humans are not weak. Humans cannot be predicted. Humans convert danger into opportunity. They learn faster than any machine, they adapt collectively, and every attack against them strengthens them." And the fleet had learned too late that humans were weapons not in body but in mind, in instinct, in cooperation. And the soldier smiled at Lena and Coder, and together they watched humanity rise, unstoppable, unstoppable, unstoppable. The stars above shone on a city that had survived every test, every attack, every attempt to break it, and every street, every rooftop, every citizen was part of a network that could not be defeated. And the aliens would remember this day as the moment they underestimated humanity, the moment they discovered that what they had called weakness was in fact their greatest threat, the human mind and spirit, unbroken, unyielding, undefeated. And Keth typed the final entry, realizing the truth that humans had weaponized life itself, and nothing in the galaxy could ever erase their adaptability and their will and their relentless determination to survive and rise and conquer. And humanity looked up at the stars, knowing that they had turned survival into a power that no species could challenge. The end